I just rediscovered this video today. I just love how good this video is.
Vote, I don't believe in democracy.
Okay.
You know, I believe in Thule, the ancient city, and raising Thule. And I think that Trump is the candidate who's going to raise Thule and Atlantis. I believe in global cooling the earth, the sea levels lowering, and I believe in land raising from the bottom of the ocean with ancient ruins on it, like the ruins of Thule. And I believe that Trump's going to accomplish all of that.
How?
He's going to prove that UFOs exist. The government has known about it for a long time. They've known that the UFOs are out there and that they're trying to communicate with us and that they have secrets about the origins of human consciousness. Are you familiar with the philosopher Friedrich Schelling? Have you read the critical historical introduction to the philosophy of mythology? Schelling is a German idealist philosopher. He was roommates with Hölderlin and with Hegel. And he talks about all of this. He predicted it a long time ago. Trump is going to make German idealism real. He's going to complete the system. Kant, he could not complete the system of German idealism. Trump is going to complete the system. He's going to derive the complete system.
That was terrifying you, right? That terrifies you, right?
It terrifies me. How can we complete the system of German idealism?
I hope we never do.
I don't know. No one could do it. Hegel couldn't do it. Schelling couldn't do it. Fichte couldn't do it. Reinhold couldn't do it. Maman couldn't do it. No one could complete the system of German idealism.
Well, that would be good. It's good that we don't complete it, right? I mean, they almost did in 1933 to 45. They didn't one day out of 12
German
years.
idealism. First critique, published in 1781. Trump is a Kantian. I want it to be clear to everyone here. Donald Trump is a Kantian. He's a German idealist.
Wow. Well,
Okay?
He's a drum, He's a drum.
Can someone Google that?
He's a drum.
He's a German idealist.
Are you from New York?
No, I'm not from New York.
Are you, how old are you? You look really young. Are you,
I'm eternal.
have you been to college?
I'm not in college. I just want everyone to know, everyone needs to be aware that the system of German idealism is about to be complete. Do you know the works of Friedrich Schelling? Do you know about Fichte? Do you know about Fichte? Book learning. Do you know about Fichte? Books. Yeah, I'm Burn the books. Burn the books. We don't need democracy. We don't need right. We got Trump elected. We got Trump elected. Follow me on Twitter. Have a good night.
Alright, so if that freaked you out, if you have no idea what that guy's talking about, let's try to find a good one. School life is always pretty good.
Georg Friedrich Hegel was born in Stuttgart in 1770. Intellectually he was adventurous, but in externals respectable, conventional, and proud of it. He ascended the academic tree and reached the topmost branch, head of the University of Berlin, when he was 60 years old. He died the following year. Hegel wrote some very long and very famous books, among them The Phenomenology of Spirit, The Science of Logic, and Elements of the Philosophy of Right. But, we'll be frank, he wrote horribly. His work is confusing and complicated when it should be clear and direct. He tapped into a weakness of human nature, to be trustful.
Alright, so basically with Hegel, the big part up front is that he looked back at Christianity to find a new reason for the development of thought and the meaning of life and all of that stuff. And since Christianity was still the main way of thinking, he came up with this phenomenology concept.
Compensate for a previous mistake. He proposed that it generally takes 3 moves before the right balance on any issue can be found, a process that he named the dialectic. He was often thinking of the complex twists and turns that brought about the modern state. We can also think of the slow path towards sensible attitudes to sex in our own time. The Victorians imposed too much repression, yet the 1960s may have turned out to be too liberal. It might only be by the 2020s that we'll find the right balance between extremes. All this can seem the most appalling waste of time, but Hegel insists that the painful stepping from error to error is inevitable, something we must expect and reconcile ourselves to when planning our lives or contemplating history books. And sometimes, in this process of moving from error to error, we will find a new solution that manages to synthesize the good qualities of the previous solutions to make something really new and different and better. 4. Art has a purpose. Hegel vigorously rejected the idea of art for art's sake. Hegel took a very positive view of 5. We need new institutions. Hegel took a very positive view of institutions and of the power they can wield. This was a point Hegel made again and again in different ways. For ideas to be active and effective in the world, a lot more is needed than that ideas are simply correct. To make major truths powerful in society, they need employees and buildings and budgets and legal advisors. Institutions allow for the scale of time and power that big projects need to become effective in the world. So, as new needs of a society get recognized, they should ideally lead not just to new books, but to the formation of new institutions. Nowadays, we might say we need major new institutions to focus on relationships, consumer education, career choice, mood management, and how to bring up less damaged children. Hegel helps us to see valuable insights where we might initially resist them, in art, in institutions, in the ideas of our enemies, and in the strange mistakes of the past. His insight is that growth requires the clash of divergent ideas, and therefore that it will be painful and slow. But at least once we know this, we don't have to compound our troubles by thinking them abnormal. Hegel gives us a more accurate and hence more manageable view of ourselves, our difficulties, and where we are in history.
So that's it right there in a nutshell. Thank you, Alain de Botton. So the big thing is this phenomenology concept, how there's a struggle, how you never quite find the right balance, and therefore things always continue in a struggling manner. The balance probably never will be met. And this institution ideas, the idea about establishing institutions. And so you have the ideas of phenomenology and institutions. That's massive. That's massive.
Immanuel Kant is a philosopher who tried to work out how human beings could be good and kind outside of the exhortations and blandishments of traditional religions. He was born in 1724 in the Baltic city of Königsberg, which at that time was part of Prussia and now belongs to Russia, renamed Kaliningrad. Kant's parents were very modest. His father was a saddle maker. Kant never had much money, a fact he dealt with cheerfully by living very modestly. It wasn't until he was in his 50s that he became a fully salaried professor and attained a moderate degree of prosperity. His family were deeply religious and very strict. Later in life, Kant did not have any conventional religious beliefs, but he was acutely aware of just how much religion had contributed to his parents' ability to cope with all the hardships of their existence, and how useful religion could be in fostering social cohesion and community. Kant was physically very slight, frail, and anything but good-looking. Yet he was very sociable, and some of his colleagues used to criticize him for going to too many parties. When eventually he was able to entertain, he had rules about conversation at his table. At the start of a dinner party, he decreed that people should swap stories about what had been happening recently. Then there should be a major phase of reflective discourse, in which those present attempted to clarify. It was this awareness that led him to formulate what would be his life's project, the desire to replace religious authority with the authority of reason, that is, human intelligence. When it came to religion, Kant summed up his views in a book entitled Religion Within the Bounds of Reason Alone. Here he argued that although historical religions had all been wrong in the content of what they'd believed, they had latched onto a great need to promote ethical behaviour, a need which still remained. It was in this context that Kant came up with the idea for which he is perhaps still most famous, what he called the categorical imperative. This strange-sounding term first appeared in a horrendously named work, Groundwork of the Metaphysics of Morals. The categorical imperative states, "Act only according to that maxim by which you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law." What did Kant mean by this? This was only a very formal restatement of an idea that's been around for a long time, something we meet with in all the main religions. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Kant was offering a handy way of testing the morality of an action by imagining how it would be if it were generally practiced and you were the victim of it. It might be tempting to filch a few pads of paper from the stationery cupboard at work. It seems like a small thing, but if everyone did this, the cupboard and society at large would need a lot of guards. Similarly, if you have an affair and keep it quiet from your partner, you might feel that's okay, but the categorical imperative comes down against this, because you would then have to embrace the idea that it would be equally okay for your partner to have affairs and not tell you. The categorical imperative is designed to shift our perspective, to get us to see our own behaviour in less immediately personal terms, and thereby recognise some of its limitations. Kant went on to argue that the core idea of the categorical imperative...
German idealism was a speculative philosophical movement that emerged in Germany in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. It was a reaction from Immanuel Kant's critique of pure reason and was closely linked with both Romanticism and the revolutionary politics of the Enlightenment. The most notable thinkers in the movement were Johann Gottlieb Fichte, Friedrich Schelling and Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, while Friedrich Heinrich Jacobi, Gottlob Ernst Schulze, Karl Leonhard Reinhold and Friedrich Schleiermacher also made major contributions. Meaning of idealism. The word idealism has more than one meaning. The philosophical meaning of idealism here is that the properties we discover in objects depend on the way that those objects appear to us, as perceiving subjects, and not something they possess in themselves, apart from our experience of them. The very notion of a thing in itself should be understood as an option of a set of functions for an operating mind, such that we consider something that appears without respect to the specific manner in which it appears, correlating more to something like idealism than the common notion of idealism. The question of what properties a thing might have, independently of the mind, is thus unknowable and a moot point within the idealist tradition. Background. Kant's work purported to bridge the two dominant philosophical schools in the 18th century. 1. Rationalism, which held that knowledge could be attained by reason alone a priori, and 2. Empiricism, which held that knowledge could be arrived at only through the senses a posteriori. Kant's solution was to propose that while we can know via sensory experience particular facts about the world, we cannot know the form they must take prior to any experience. That is, we cannot know what objects we will encounter, but we can know how we will encounter them. Kant called his mode of philosophizing critical philosophy, in that it was supposedly less concerned with setting out positive doctrine than with critiquing the limits to the theories we can set out. The conclusion he presented, as above, he called transcendental idealism. This distinguished it from classical idealism and subjective idealism such as George Berkeley's, which held that external objects have actual being or real existence only when they are perceived by an observer. Kant said that there are things in themselves, noumena, that is, things that exist other than being merely sensations and ideas in our minds. Kant held in the Critique of Pure Reason that the world of appearances is empirically real and transcendentally ideal. The mind plays a central role in influencing the way that the world is experienced. We perceive phenomena through time, space and the categories of the understanding. It is this notion that was taken to heart by Kant's philosophical successors. At the other end of the movement, Arthur Schopenhauer is not normally classed as a German idealist. He considered himself to be a transcendental idealist. In his major work The World as Will and Representation, he discusses his indebtedness to Kant, and the work includes Schopenhauer's extensive analysis of the critique. The young Hegelians, a number of philosophers who developed Hegel's work in various directions, were in some cases idealists. On the other hand, Karl Marx, who was numbered among them, had professed himself to be a materialist. Kant's transcendental idealism consisted of taking a point of view outside of and above oneself and understanding that the mind directly knows only phenomena or ideas. Whatever exists other than mental phenomena, or ideas that appear to the mind, is a thing in itself and cannot be directly and immediately known. Kant had criticized pure reason. He wanted to restrict reasoning, judging, and speaking only to objects of possible experience. The main German idealists, who had been theology students, reacted against Kant's stringent limits. theorists. Jacobi in 1787, Friedrich Heinrich Jacobi addressed in his book on faith, or Idealism and Realism, Kant's concept of thing in itself. Jacobi agreed that the objective thing in itself cannot be directly known. However, he stated it must be taken on faith. This faith or belief is a result of revelation or immediately known, but logically unproved truth. The real existence of a thing in itself is revealed or disclosed to the observing subject. In this way, the subject directly knows the ideal.
Hello and welcome to this webcast lecture in the History and Context of Journalism series here at the University of Winchester. My name is Andrew Giddings, and today our subject is Philosophical Idealism, the early 19th century movement and ideas associated with Kant and Hegel. I have with me in the studio Chris Horry, who gave a lecture today on this topic, and I'm also joined by Julie Cordier, a student on the course. Immanuel Kant was born in Königsberg in 1724 and wrote two of the most influential books in Western canon, The Critique of Pure Reason in 1781 and The Fundamentals of the Metaphysics of Morals in 1785. Hegel's influence is, if anything, even greater because of his association with German nationalism. My name is Andrew Giddings, and today our subject is Philosophical Idealism, the early 19th century movement and ideas associated with Kant and Hegel. I have with me in the studio Chris Horry, who gave a lecture today on this topic, and I'm also joined by Julie Cordier, a student on the course. Immanuel Kant was born in Königsberg in 1724 and wrote two of the most influential books in the Western canon, The Critique of Pure Reason in 1781 and The Fundamentals of the Metaphysics of Morals in 1785. Hegel's influence is, if anything, even greater because of his association with German nationalism, and also the career of his most famous follower Karl Marx, who we'll be looking at later. Chris, would you begin by assessing the importance of the material we were looking at today?
I think it's very significant, and way beyond the rather narrow sphere of philosophy. Kant, for example, and his ideas on the nature of the universe, very influential in modern theoretical physics in ways that we can perhaps explore. But in the area of morality, his influence has been absolutely enormous, and I think there's a very important practical aspect to this for journalists above all, because he's concerned, he puts central to his moral system subjective ideas of honesty. And I personally take this directly from Kant when I'm thinking about my own work and teaching students as well in the area of law and ethics, which I do here at the university, that we can never really know the truth of any matter objectively. We might be misled, we might make an honest mistake, or what we're trying to report about, the facts might not be fully revealed yet. But we always know when we're being honest. Generally speaking, I'm not a great fan of metaphysics, but he's undeniably onto something here, Kant. I do believe it's true that people, assuming that all people are the same, therefore another person is much like me, does know when we are being honest and does know when we're being dishonest, and we can measure with some degree of precision how far we are living up to or departing from our own standards in that respect. So I think he's a very difficult, complex thinker, covering a span from theoretical physics through morality and politics and technical philosophy itself. So one of the leading thinkers of the 19th century, somebody involved in setting the intellectual climate of that period, and certainly somebody we need to try and acquaint ourselves with here at the university.
Last week we've talked about utilitarianism in the previous lecture. Can you tell us about Kant's philosophy of morality, how different it is from utilitarianism?
The exact opposite. We discussed previously utilitarianism. The essence there, people like Bentham and Mill, is that the general good is achieved when each person pursues their own selfish or enlightened selfish self-interest. That by each of us striving for the most utility is a technical word they use for something like satisfaction or happiness, by doing that we will bring about the general good. The phrase is, a moral act is that which, in utilitarianism, a moral act is that which brings about the greatest good for the greatest number of people, regardless of intentions. So somebody can have really quite devious and evil intentions, but if it results in general good, then it's a moral act for the utilitarians. Kant is completely opposite to that. He's not interested in the circumstances in which you make a moral decision, and he's not interested in the outcome. He's only interested in the subjective intention. Famously, he says, it's better that the whole world should perish then the person should tell a lie. He recognises that people will tell lies and so on, that they will depart from these standards which he believes are known internally to everybody. He calls it the moral law within, that every person has this within them. He also, therefore, by the way, I didn't quite touch upon this in the lecture, but I wanted to do so. He sees this internal moral intuition as a proof of his entire system. He also sees it as a proof of the validity of democracy and equal rights and human rights, because he believes everybody has these same moral sensibilities. The utilitarians think that it's not proven that everybody would have these internal moral senses. They're only going to judge people on their action, for example, in the economic marketplace. You know that people really want this outcome, they want to buy this thing rather than that thing, by how much money they're prepared to spend on it, for example, and that's an objective standard of what those people think is morally right for them or what they desire. So that involves the idea that people are not equal, that you can tolerate inequality. And of course, one consequence of liberal economics is that it not only tolerates inequality, but even sees it as a positive good. Kant wouldn't see that. The political implications of his system is that everything should be shared equally. Everybody must be treated absolutely equally all the time.
Fantastic. And Chris, on the subject of physics or metaphysics, in contrast to some other philosophers, you mentioned in the lecture that Kant asserts that things must always exist in some way, whether or not they're being perceived at any time, and that we know this through intuition. For example, if you leave a room, then you know that everything that was in the room when you were there is still there after you leave. And I noticed a parallel with modern quantum physics, which is full of theories such as dark matter and the Higgs boson, things which we're unable to perceive, but it's asserted that they must exist because we can see their effects. Can you just discuss this parallel a little bit more with us, please?
Right. Well, we're covering a lot of territory there, and I think that there's two things in there. First of all, there is the perception issue and the problem of the nature of the unperceived object. So Kant is very interested in what are objects like if they are not perceived. And here he's in a sort of dialogue with the empiricists, who were deeply troubled by this problem. The empiricists, generally speaking, are the people who only believe that objects are there when they're being perceived. That led them into some very strange positions. George Berkeley, the philosopher, believed that objects literally disappeared or ceased to exist when you weren't observing them, and that they flashed back into existence. And what kept them, where they went, was into the kind of mind of God. Now, Kant has a more sophisticated answer to that problem, which is that things have a dual nature, that they have a phenomenal nature when we're observing them, and a noumenal nature, or kind of potential, when they're not being observed. That when they're not being observed, they are things in themselves, and we will never be able to describe those things because they exist in a noumenal realm that's separate to the realm of ordinary perception. Now, this all sounds very, very strange to us in our day-to-day life, because we do depend on those habits of mind that if I go out of the...
Fuck. Just stopped. Alright, well, as you can see, this meme is traveling at a fairly effective rate. 2 weeks ago, so 6 years ago, were some of the actual attendees of the lecture. We think this guy's English isn't that great. I'm not really following. All right. Actually, what I do want to bring up is, since we're in New England, and I want to focus on New England matters and New England history, New England philosophy, New England, all the great stuff that's come from New England, and which relates to this matter is Transcendentalism in Massachusetts. Because Massachusetts, well, let's see what this says. I have no idea what this video is.
I'm going back to Massachusetts.
Alright, I'm not sure what
The faces fade as the years go.
but I do want to take a trip over to Concord for the channel
I never thought of
and
myself as
check out some of this
transcendentalist, but I looked
Walden
in the mirror
Pond
and
stuff,
said,
see where it all
I
started.
got
Philosophical movement known as Transcendentalism. I know you're probably wondering at this point, what the hell is Transcendentalism? Well, in Ralph Waldo Emerson's own words, he says, the Transcendentalist adopts the whole connection of spiritual doctrine. He believes in miracle in the perpetual openness of the human mind to new influx of light and power. He believes in inspiration and in ecstasy. He wishes that the spiritual principle should be suffered to demonstrate itself to the end, in all possible applications to the state of man, without admission of anything unspiritual, that is, anything positive, dogmatic, personal. Thus, the spiritual measure of inspiration is the depth of the thought and never who said it. And so he resists all attempts to palm other rules and measures on the spirit than his own. While who said it?
It's pretty great stuff right there. Thanks, Ralph. New England, 1840s. Uh-oh. A lot of shit happens around that time. A lot of stuff was happening.
Against these scriptures. In their perspective, a loving God would not have led so much of humanity astray. They're England and around.
Alright, this
Boston.
video sucks. You can
To
tell
an-
how many high school videos are done for Transcendentalism. Because, you know, obviously it's in every high school curriculum in the country.
Massachusetts, you need to come to Sleepy Hollow Cemetery in Concord, Massachusetts, because from where I'm standing, I'm within about 20 feet of quite a few famous writers. Right here is Henry David Thoreau. The pencils seem to be a thing that they do. And then right over here is Louisa May Alcott. I can't forget this. I can't forget this one here. This is Ralph Waldo Emerson, which is just about 50 feet away from where.
All right, so you can see that New England obviously has a very rich history, and this is just one slice of New England history and how it connects with the entire fucking world. You got to be honest. And even though, you know, this doesn't really seem like it connects that far into the present, their future, the truth is all this philosophy is connected, and it's gone all sorts of directions. It's gone good directions, it's gone bad directions. And I think that's why Boston and New England is the perfect opportunity for a new kind of politics in the country. This utopianism stuff has got to go, though. Transcendentalists, come on, come on. Let's get serious. Let's get a little bit more material with our philosophy. That's what I say anyway. Until we get some ideas on the table. All right. So that went from, let's see, we started with Hegel, a little bit of Kant, and then we ended up into the New England version of these philosophers, the Transcendentalists, which will set us up nicely for the 1850s and the start of communism and progressivism and socialism that comes out of the Industrial Revolution. We got a long way to go, but we'll certainly get there.